Hidden beneath the Arctic and Pacific, Russian nuclear submarines capable of destroying entire cities are ready to fire if Putin issues the orders. That is the unmistakable warning from one of Vladimir Putin's most powerful security officials, who says Russia's sea-based nuclear forces are at full combat readiness and prepared for conflict in any ocean under any scenario. Kremlin aide Nikolai Patrushev issued the declaration during an interview with Russian state news agency RIA Novosti, presenting Moscow's submarine fleet as an ultimate guarantee that no enemy could eliminate Russia's ability to retaliate. Patrushev's decision to publicly emphasize Russia's nuclear submarines turns the declaration into a deliberate message to Ukraine, NATO, and the United States. Ukraine has intensified attacks on Russian vessels and maritime infrastructure in the Black Sea and Sea of Azov, while NATO continues strengthening its military planning across waters bordering Russia. Patrushev said the Russian Navy was capable of guaranteeing national security across every maritime and oceanic theater, regardless of how a future confrontation unfolds. He said Moscow was prepared to defend its interests both near Russia's coastline and in distant regions of what he called the global ocean. At the center of strategy mentioned by Patrushev are Russia's ballistic missile submarines, the most difficult to detect component of its nuclear triad. These vessels are designed to disappear beneath the ocean for extended patrols, carrying intercontinental missiles armed with multiple nuclear warheads. Their mission is not simply to launch a first attack, it is to survive an enemy strike and preserve Russia's ability to deliver overwhelming retaliation. That ability, known as a secure second strike, is what makes the underwater nuclear force one of the most important elements of Moscow's deterrence strategy. Patrushev's warning comes around 2 months after Russia conducted one of its largest recent nuclear exercises. The 3-day drills in May involved around 64,000 troops, more than 200 missile launchers, over 140 aircraft, 73 surface warships, and 13 submarines. 8 submarines were reportedly armed with nuclear-tipped intercontinental ballistic missiles. Russia's Northern and Pacific fleets participated, demonstrating their ability to conduct coordinated operations across 2 widely separated oceans. Putin described nuclear use as an extreme and exceptional measure for defending national security, but Russia's updated doctrine gives Moscow broader circumstances under which nuclear weapons could be considered, including certain conventional attacks supported by a nuclear-armed power. Patrushev did not threaten an immediate launch or name a specific adversary, but the purpose of his declaration is clear: to convince every potential opponent that no attack could remove Russia's ability to respond. Ukraine may challenge Moscow's ships in the Black Sea, NATO may strengthen its forces along Russia's maritime frontier, but beneath the Arctic ice and across the Pacific, Russia says its nuclear submarines remain hidden, armed, and ready for combat. Russia has issued one of its strongest warnings to NATO. Moscow says any aggression against Russia will be met with a decisive and devastating response, warning that it is prepared to use all available forces and means if its security is threatened. In comments published on Friday, the Russian Foreign Ministry said Moscow would respond to any attack using all available forces and means, warning that the consequences for those responsible would be devastating. The statement came in response to NATO's latest commitments to increase military assistance for Ukraine. According to the Foreign Ministry, the alliance's continued military support for Kyiv is further escalating the conflict and increasing security risks in Europe. The ministry said, "The response to aggression against our country will be decisive and devastating for the instigators. We reserve our right to respond to threats against us using all available forces and means." Although the statement did not specify what those available forces and means would include, the wording mirrors previous Russian strategic doctrine, which allows for the use of the country's full military capabilities if the state faces what it considers an existential threat. Moscow also repeated its long-standing position that Western weapons supplied to Ukraine effectively make NATO countries participants in the conflict. Russian officials argued that arms deliveries prolong the war and undermine prospects for a negotiated settlement. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has repeatedly stated that any shipment carrying military equipment intended for Ukraine becomes a legitimate military target for Russian forces once identified. Since the conflict began, Russia has regularly carried out missile and drone strikes against Ukrainian logistics hubs, rail networks, warehouses, and military-industrial facilities, claiming many of those sites were involved in receiving Western weapons. The latest warning comes as NATO members continue expanding military support for Ukraine through air defense systems, armored vehicles, long-range weapons, and ammunition. At the recent NATO summit, leaders reaffirmed their commitment to sustaining military assistance for Kyiv, despite repeated warnings from Moscow. Russia has consistently argued that the growing flow of Western arms increases the risk of direct confrontation between Russia and NATO. Western governments reject that accusation, maintaining that military aid is intended to help Ukraine defend itself under international law. As military support for Kyiv grows, so too does the risk that the conflict could widen beyond Ukraine's borders.
Is Putin preparing to widen the Ukraine war? A bombshell report claims the Russian president is rejecting calls for peace and is instead leaning toward further military escalation, now towards NATO bases. The report comes just days after President Donald Trump said peace between Russia and Ukraine was closer than people realize, following separate conversations with Putin and Ukrainian President Zelensky. But sources familiar with the Kremlin's thinking say Putin has no intention of backing down. According to the report, Putin remains determined to seize the remaining parts of Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. One source claimed the Russian leader recently rejected suggestions from advisors to accept a ceasefire based on current front lines. The report says Ukraine's recent drone attacks on Russian oil refineries, ports, and energy facilities have only strengthened Putin's resolve. One person described a high probability that Russia could escalate the conflict in the coming months. Adding to concerns, Russian military commentators have publicly discussed possible future strikes beyond Ukraine. Former Russian Defense Ministry official Andrei Ilnitsky suggested Russia could target major Ukrainian industrial sites before considering attacks on NATO-linked military facilities in the Baltic states and Romania. Military analysts warn that any strike on NATO territory could trigger a direct confrontation with the alliance under Article 5 collective defense commitments. Some experts believe Moscow may instead seek limited actions designed to test NATO's unity without provoking a full-scale war.
Well, we've settled a lot of wars, and this one is the one that I thought maybe would be the easiest. But Putin's a difficult character, and this guy's a difficult character. It's not the easiest thing, and there's a lot of commitment, and there's a lot of love of the countries and everything else. But I think we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of weeks, and we'll see how it all goes.
Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, however, said Russia remains open to what it calls a peaceful resolution. However, he added that Moscow has enough military capability to continue its special military operation independently.
Undoubtedly, this is an event that generates a great deal of interest, including our interest. We, of course, will be tracking all the news and all the information that will be coming from Ankara. In the context of preparing for this summit, we heard many statements that concerned our country. To our regret, these were not statements about constructive interaction and dialogue, but rather statements of a confrontational nature. Ukraine constantly asks for new types of weapons, both defensive and offensive in nature. This cannot in any way impede the continuation of the special military operation until its goals are achieved. At the same time, as always, I would like to reiterate that for us a political and diplomatic settlement of this conflict remains the preference, and only in the absence of the Kyiv regime's readiness for a peaceful settlement does the special military operation continue until our goals are fully achieved.
It is absolutely clear that the enemy aims to damage the economy, but most importantly, they aim to create a nervous atmosphere in society. We understand that this task is impossible. The safety margin of Russia's power system is very high, one of the highest in the world. We just need to organize the work with vertically integrated companies, reach agreements faster so that they do not hoard the product exclusively within their own distribution network, within their gas stations, but would supply the necessary products to independent gas stations. Yes, and Kobzev's proposal should also be considered, and we must expand the opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses to produce petroleum products as quickly as possible.
The situation on the peninsula in Sevastopol remains complex. Sergei Valerievich and I report to you constantly. You are aware of all the difficulties, so I will not dwell on them in detail. Now, thanks to the colossal efforts of the transport sector, as Andrei Sergeyevich mentioned, logistics are being maintained with the military's help and supplies are increasing. Nevertheless, it has not yet returned to a normal state. And for example, Sevastopol currently receives on average only 1/3 of the city's daily needs. Of course, as Alexander Valentinovich said, we primarily supply essential services, and when some volumes accumulate, we then release fuel for limited sale to the public. But that is not even the main problem right now. Vladimir Vladimirovich, you are aware of it too. Unfortunately, it so happened that there were no gas stations of vertically integrated companies on the peninsula. Only large private traders are operating there. And due to logistics difficulties as well as issues related to exchange purchases, the price on the peninsula has now more than doubled. For example, the most popular 95-octane gasoline costs 197 rubles at official gas stations today, while at vertically integrated company stations in the neighboring Krasnodar territory, it is 73.5 rubles. We have appealed to the government of the Russian Federation and have received preliminary support from our Ministry of Energy to establish a subsidized price for gasoline during this period, so our gas stations can purchase it and supply the peninsula. This would significantly ease the situation right now, and then we will manage the logistical challenges. That is all from Vladimir Vladimirovich.
Yes, Alexander Valentinovich Novak, please respond to this. Go ahead.
Yes, Vladimir Vladimirovich, the governor is right that there are no vertically integrated companies there. Historically, there have always been private companies that handled supply and accordingly sells through their own gas stations. Currently, the resources supplied to Crimea and Sevastopol come from vertically integrated companies because we have no other resources. Fuel producers at oil refineries are exclusively our vertically integrated companies. And due to the complications in logistics, for obvious reasons, routes and delivery methods have changed. So fuel, of course, now costs more than in other regions, even at cost price. But that is the first factor. The second factor is that due to the shortage, the resulting prices are higher than the cost. And this is more of a market speculative factor. We are looking into this together with the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service. Overall, if we talk about leveling it to a relatively economically justified level in line with other regions, then of course such subsidies are required for the regions, and we are ready to review this situation together with our colleagues from Crimea and Sevastopol.
Yes, but let us agree that the wording will be different. Not just ready to consider, not just to consider, but to consider and make a decision as quickly as possible. No need to delay, all right? Especially since,
yes,
well, we do have such opportunities.
The situation in the Irkutsk region is difficult, but at the same time it is under control and manageable. We are working in close contact with Alexander Valentinovich, with our colleagues at the Ministry of Energy, and with the Rosneft company. As you mentioned, we have already concluded a number of contractual agreements today between independent oil companies and Rosneft, which allows us to understand what the projected situation will be.
All right, but you confirm what I said, right? Also, the interaction between major companies, Rosneft in particular, and the region.
Sergei Yuryevich, Igor Ivanovich, and I are in constant contact. Indeed, at a certain stage, he helped us.
Well, I understand, Igor Ivanovich, that you did not expand the gas station network, but increased fuel supplies to the existing gas stations, right?
Yes. But the fact that at a certain stage, starting from May, the volumes that were paid for through the exchange were simply suspended.
Understood.
And today, this situation has begun to improve.
On average, the subsidy we are requesting from the government is around 85 rubles per liter of fuel, give or take.
We must, of course, provide for them. Thank you very much. We must, of course, provide for the needs of government agencies, law enforcement and security services. That is obvious. And keeping in mind that citizens should not feel any significant burden, a decision on subsidies should be made as quickly as possible. Alexander Valentinovich, please work this out with the Ministry of Finance, and if any support from my side is needed, although I think the Ministry of Finance understands everything as well. These are temporary matters. These are completely obvious things also related to actions to disrupt the vacation season, the vacations of our citizens in the south of the country, including in Crimea, but actions to support the people who live there and those who came for a vacation must be carried out now, not sometime later. We need to make these decisions as quickly as possible, calculate them together with colleagues from the region, and make a decision. It is absolutely clear that the enemy aims to damage the economy, but most importantly, they aim to create a nervous atmosphere in society. We understand that this task is impossible. The safety margin of Russia's power system is very high, one of the highest in the world. We just need to organize the work with vertically integrated companies, reach agreements faster so that they do not hoard the product exclusively within their own distribution network, within their gas stations, but would supply the necessary products to independent gas stations. Yes, and Kobzev's proposal should also be considered, and we must expand the opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses to produce petroleum products as quickly as possible. Do everything possible to ensure that everything functions normally for us. As the Minister of Agriculture reports to me, there are no supply problems in the agricultural sector at this time. Everything is provided for there, and I hope it stays that way. I ask you to make prompt decisions, and Alexander Valentinovich and the Minister of Transport, you must report to me and the Prime Minister on an ongoing basis, of course.